We make plenty of decisions in our day-to-day lives, whether to save for retirement, register as an organ donor, or accept the cookies on a website. The deciding factor are often tiny, insignificant details, and this can be used to help people make better decisions. Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein describe how that works in their book Nudge. And today we'll take a look at that. Welcome to the Soft Skill channel. My name is Sebastian Jung and I welcome you to another book review. Today we'll take a look at Nudge by Thaler and Sunstein. Richard Thaler is a US economist and an important figure in behavioral economics. He even received the Nobel Prize in Economics. Currently, Thaler is a professor at a business school, the Booth School of Business, that belongs to the University of Chicago. Some of you might remember Thaler from Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. He was mentioned a couple of times there, and it's no surprise because Thaler worked with Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky at the Stanford University in the late 70s. Cass Sunstein is a US-American legal scholar, and he currently is a professor at the Harvard Law School. Earlier, he was for a long time, for 27 years, working at the University of Chicago Law School, which is probably how he met Thaler. After Nudge was released, it became quite popular, and former US President Barack Obama was among those interested in the topic, and he gave Sunstein a position in his administration as the leader of the White House Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. Sunstein also is a co-author of Daniel Kahneman's newest book, Noise. Nudge was released in 2008 and a revised final edition was released in 2021, and this review is about the final edition. It consists of 5 parts, each with several chapters and subchapters, and we will take a look at them. But first, we will take a look at the introduction, which is quite interesting. In the introduction, a couple of keywords are explained that we will encounter throughout the book: choice architect, nudge, and libertarian paternalism. Let's take a look at the choice architect first. There is a simple example of the owner of a cafeteria. In a cafeteria, people make decisions about what to eat. And the owner of the cafeteria creates the framework conditions these decisions are made in, and this influences the decisions. For example, the owner could place the salad bar right at the entrance and the desserts somewhere on the sidelines. And this would cause people to eat healthier, to eat more salad and less desserts. This would be a nudge. A nudge is a tiny push in a certain direction. A decision is influenced in a certain direction. Now, obviously, those customers of the cafeteria are still perfectly free to choose what to eat. They don't have to eat salad just because it's placed up front. They can just go past the salad bar and go grab the desserts. And plenty of customers will do just that. However, on average, more people will eat salad and less people will eat desserts if things are placed in that way. Now, it's important to understand that choice architecture cannot be avoided, because obviously this cafeteria has to be set up in some way. The different kinds of food have to be arranged in some way, and this will always influence customers' decisions. So the question is not whether to do it, but how to do it. What foods do I place up front? Those that make most profit for myself, or do I help people eat healthier? And here Thaler and Sunstein have a clear ideal, and this they call libertarian paternalism. It sounds a bit complicated. The libertarian part means there should be as much freedom as possible. People should be free to decide as they please. However, and this is where the paternalism comes in, they should get some fatherly help, fatherly advice, and a tiny shove in a good direction. So Thaler and Sunstein want to use nudges in a positive way to encourage decisions that are good for us, that are beneficial. More precisely, nudges should favor the decision we would make ourselves if we had all the necessary information, if we were free of biases and fallacies, and if we had sufficient time to think things through. The principle of nudges is today used by several governments around the world. They have created specific teams or projects that deal with the topic, so-called nudge units or nudging units, the first of which was founded in the UK. In the remainder of the book, the concept of nudges is explored in more detail. The first part is called Humans and Econs, and it discusses the question, why do we need nudges? Why are nudges useful? And the most important reason is that humans are not rational. We don't always make good decisions by ourselves. You probably recall the term econ from Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. It's a term from economics. The econ is an imaginary kind of human that always makes rational decisions. However, actual humans do not. And one important reason for that are biases and fallacies. Now, this is a topic we discuss a lot on the channel, therefore I won't go into a lot of detail here. Thaler and Sunstein provide a couple of examples and we will have a look at those in separate videos. They also reference Daniel Kahneman's two systems we know from Thinking Fast and Slow, and the detail I found quite funny here is they have a nice metaphor, because Kahneman's system 2, which is our slow, conscious, analytical thinking, is represented by Mr. Spock from Star Trek, while Kahneman's system 1, our automatic, intuitive, effortless, unconscious thinking, is represented by Homer Simpson. Another thing I found nice and interesting is this part of the book starts with an optical illusion to make the point that we can't always trust our senses. And a bit later, a certain nudge is described that uses a similar mechanism. It's used in Chicago at the Lakeshore Drive, a nice drive with a great view, but unfortunately it has a certain turn that is a bit difficult to take, and accidents occurred frequently there. So they used a very smart trick. They painted white lines across the road that you would drive over, and the space between those lines grew smaller over time. So drivers had the impression that their vehicle was speeding up, and they reduced gas, reduced speed to counter that. So actually their vehicles slowed down, and that helped them to take this difficult turn. I found this quite interesting. An important topic in this first part of the book is temptation. Temptation is also something that makes good decisions difficult. Imagine you are at a party and you know that there will be great food later, but there is also a nice big bowl of cashews or another snack you like right in front of you. In your head, you have a kind of planner who says, "Oh, there is great food later, so it would be better not to ruin my appetite by eating too many snacks." However, in your head there is also a doer who lives in the moment who says, "Oh, cashews, nom 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 nom," and you end up eating plenty. And we use a lot of tricks and strategies to get a hold of this doer and to trick this doer. We write shopping lists that don't include plenty of snacks and sweets, and we use alarm clocks to wake up in the morning. Tyler and Sunstein show an especially insidious kind that will run away and hide while it is ringing, so you have to get up and search for it to turn it off. And of course, here nudges can help to overcome temptation. Finally, a very interesting aspect that's also discussed is the social aspect, the social component, such as herd behavior. What I found quite funny is that nudges work especially well if they contain a reference, if they contain a peer comparison, a reference to what other people do. For example, if you get a reminder letter saying basically, well, the other citizens in your area mostly turned in their tax declarations already, but you did not. Or if hotel guests are told, yeah, most other guests staying at that room use their towels more than one time, so it would be nice if you would do so as well. This has a very big effect. This greatly influences people. Part 2 of the book is called The Tools of the Choice Architect. Now, here things get especially interesting, so I will discuss this in a bit more detail. First of all, we get to know when nudges are useful, in what situations they are especially useful. For example, in situations where we are prone to spacing out, to forgetting things. Here checklists can help, such as the checklists used by pilots before a flight to make sure everything is working right, or checklists used by surgeons during operations to make sure nothing important is forgotten. Another aspect, another example I found quite interesting is frequency. Because in our lives we make some decisions that we have to make frequently, such as whether to buy a new box of milk. And there, over time, we can learn from trial and error and figure out what works best. However, there are plenty of other decisions that we only make very few times, or maybe even only once, such as the choice of a retirement saving plan or of a mortgage if we want to build or buy a house. And there it's way more difficult for us, so there nudges can be quite useful. Next, choice architecture is explored in more detail, and the means we can use to make things work better for people are explained. For example, we should make things as simple as possible. There is a nice example where tetanus vaccinations were offered at a campus at a university, and what greatly increased the number of people taking part and getting the vaccination was handing out a map of the campus with the place where you got the vaccination circled in red. Or another very important aspect are defaults, because plenty of people take the path of least resistance and just stick to the default. So a well-chosen default can make a lot of difference, and we will see several examples for that later. Another aspect I quite liked is that we should always expect error. And a nice example for that is the way an ATM works. Because at least here in Germany, if you get money from an ATM, it will first return your card and then it will give you the money. And a few years ago, it was the other way around. And this frequently caused people to forget their card in the ATM, because after getting the money, they didn't care anymore. So the new way is way better. Or another nice example is the reminder displayed by email programs. If in the email text, you mentioned attachment or the files I sent you, but the mail does not actually have an attachment yet, then a small reminder is displayed that maybe you have forgotten to attach the file or whatever you want to send. And finally, another good example is fun, because people are much more eager to participate if things are made fun. For example, people were more diligently in cleaning up dog droppings, if they could take part in a small lottery at the same time. One topic that is very important in general in regard to choice architecture is information. It makes a lot of difference what information is presented and in what way. For example, Thaler and Sunstein show that it makes a big difference that in the US, fuel consumption is given as miles per gallon, while in Europe it is provided as liters per 100 kilometers. And the US version makes it more difficult to figure out if switching to a vehicle that consumes less is worth the price. So the European version in that case is better. And in regard to information, Thaler and Sunstein have come up with a concept they call smart disclosure, or more precisely, the term originated in the Obama administration. Smart disclosure has two simple rules. First, information should be provided in a standardized, machine-readable format. That doesn't sound very exciting, but it is quite helpful. Think of online travel booking providers where you can book your travel, your flight, hotel, and everything in one place very easily. A couple of years ago, you had to go to a travel agent to do just that. And it is only possible to do it online nowadays because all participants, the airlines, the hotels, and so on, provide their data in a machine-readable format so it can be used and combined by those online booking providers. And the second rule for smart disclosure is, if a company collects information from their customers, they should make it available to those customers if they wish so. Think, for example, of all the information companies like Netflix or Amazon collect from us, all our free viewing preferences and shopping preferences and so on. And this data could be useful if we had access to it. There is a nice example, a nice positive example from the UK, where banks have to give customers their data if they wish to, the data they collected from them. And this, for example, makes it possible if you switch from one bank to another, if you move your account from one bank to another, and you have standing orders, you can just transfer them to the new bank instead of having to create them anew. And there are also apps that enable you to manage your accounts from various banks in one place. And this is made possible by this data being available. Now, apart from all those positive things, Part 2 also has a more sinister topic, more negative, and that is sludge, dark side of choice architecture. Imagine you are walking, it has rained a lot, and you are walking an unpaved dirt road, and it is all sodden and mushy, and your boots sink in at every step, and it is very difficult and cumbersome to go forward. This is the idea of a sludge. Sludge means keeping people from getting something that would actually be beneficial to them by making it more difficult, more cumbersome. Think, for example, of the process for applying for unemployment benefits. In most countries, you are required to fill out plenty of forms, and if you make mistakes, it's often severely punished, so things aren't made exactly easy for people who are entitled to receive money. And a very nice example for sludge from our day-to-day lives are the cookie policy messages on websites. Now, in Europe, websites are only allowed to place cookies, to use cookies that are strictly necessary due to technical reasons, and they need to obtain consent to place cookies that track the user's activities. Now, in surveys, only quite a small number of users agree to have their online activities tracked by companies. Only 0.1% of users agree to that. However, be honest, if such a message pops up on a website, do you just click the big green accept button? Or do you really go through 2 or 3 menus to set your preferences and restrict cookies to just the strictly necessary ones? Part 3 and 4 of the book provide some interesting real-life examples for nudges that worked well, and part 3 is about money. It discusses retirement plans, mortgages, credit cards, and insurances, but here I will only briefly discuss the retirement savings. Now, saving for retirement is often difficult because it's complicated and you postpone it and later you suffer the consequences. So this is clearly a situation where nudges can help, and especially defaults can be helpful here. There is a practice called auto-enrollment, where if you get a new job, join a new company, you are automatically enrolled to their retirement saving plan. You get a notification, you are now enrolled in the retirement saving plan, and if you wish to opt out, you can do so by filling out this form or whatever. So the default is that you take part in retirement saving, and if you really don't want it, you can opt out. And this has increased the number of people who take part in the retirement saving plan greatly. In one big statistic, it was 93% instead of 47%, so it really had a great impact. And another program that worked very well is called Save More Tomorrow. It was created by Richard Thaler and Shlomo Benazzi. And here, the simple and smart idea was, if you signed up for that, each time you got a raise, a salary increase, your contributions to retirement saving would also go up a bit. So you increased your contributions to retirement saving over time, but you never had the negative experience of having less money to spend. However, in the long run, it turned out hiding the increases in that way wasn't even necessary. It works just fine to just increase the contributions to the retirement saving plan in small steps over time, which is called automatic escalation and which is widely used today. And those programs helped a lot. So people would save more for retirement and have more money after retirement. Part 4 of the book deals with society, and here organ donations and climate change are discussed. I will only briefly discuss organ donations. It's a very interesting topic because a couple of years ago there was an interesting study by Eric Johnson and Dan Goldstein. They realized that they showed that in countries where it is presumed by default that people don't want to be organ donors and they have to specifically sign up for it, only very few people actually do it, and you end up with 5% to 30% of registered organ donors. While on the other hand, in countries that presume by default that you want to be an organ donor and you have to opt out if you don't want to be, again, very few people will do it, and you end up with plenty of organ donors, 85% and more, often more than 98%. Now, this was also described in the first edition of Nudge, and in the years since its release, several countries switched from an opt-in to an opt-out policy where you are presumed to be an organ donor by default and you have to opt out if you don't want to be. However, Thaler and Sunstein clarify that this is not actually a good way to deal with the topic, that this is not actually a good approach, because they say you have to look at the issue more closely and consider the parties involved. Now, obviously, there is a possible organ donor, and if things end up badly, this person will die under unpleasant circumstances, so organ donation becomes a matter. Then we have a patient who requires a donor organ whose life could probably be saved by receiving one. Now, this far it's obvious. However, we also have an important third party, and that is the family of the donor. Because that family just lost a loved one under unpleasant circumstances. And now we have an important matter, because all countries that have this presumed consent opt-out policy at the moment, none of them will enforce it against the wishes of the family. So if the family says we don't want any organs removed, the doctor won't say, yeah, well, he should have opted out while he was alive, now it's too late, I will remove the organs anyway. No, he will respect the wishes of the family. And this means, in the end, bottom line is, the family has to make the decisions. The decision has to be made by people who are in a very bad position because they just lost a loved one. And this, of course, is not a good approach. So what Thaler and Sunstein recommend instead is what they call prompted choice. You presume that people don't want to be organ donators. You have an opt-in policy where people have to consciously register, but you specifically ask them about it. And this is done, for example, in the US, where people are asked whether they want to be organ donors whenever they renew their license. And this has greatly increased the number of registered organ donors in the US. Some US states even have more registered organ donors than Spain, and Spain is a country that is in a pretty good position in that regard. The fifth and final part of the book is called The Complaints Department. It deals with criticism towards nudges and towards libertarian paternalism. First, Thaler and Sunstein clarify that they are, of course, aware that nudges can also be misused, and they clarify that they are aware that choice architects obviously make mistakes as well. However, they emphasize again that choice architecture cannot be avoided, that you always have to set up conditions in some way, and decisions will always be influenced in some way. Now, there are several points of criticism that are addressed here. The one I found most interesting is nudging sneaky? The idea is that regulations, bans, taxes, and so on are better than nudges because people know where they stand, they are open and transparent. However, Thaler and Sunstein say this doesn't really make sense to them because nudges are open and clearly visible as well. For example, if there is a frightening picture and a health warning on your box of cigarettes, now this is clearly visible. Or if you are automatically enrolled to retirement saving and you receive a letter informing you about it, again, you clearly are informed about it. So nudges are clearly visible. Now, however, there are situations where the design is clearly visible, but maybe the intent is not. For example, if you recall our example from the very beginning, the salad bar at the entrance of the cafeteria, now you obviously see the salad bar, but you might not know that it was placed there to make you eat healthier. So the intent might not be obvious. However, Thaler and Sunstein say this is the same for all types of influence. If you consider, for example, marketing, advertising, or the speech of a politician, it will be the same way. Nobody will clarify to you that they have some hidden agenda, that they want to sell you things or make you vote for them, but you have to figure that out yourself. Now, I don't find this that persuasive because saying, yeah, other people do it in a bad way as well is not a good excuse in my book. However, what I find more appealing is the fact that nudges will still work even if people know about them, are clearly aware they are there. And if you explain the intent to people, for example, if this letter about automatic enrollment explains why the company choose to do this, why the retirement saving plan is a good idea, and so on, it will even make the nudge more effective. So Thaler and Sunstein clearly want transparency here, and they describe the publicity principle by philosopher John Rawls. He says, one should not implement a policy that one is not willing and able to defend publicly. And Thaler and Sunstein say that nudges should be made public whenever possible and that the intent should always be explained. Finally, let's proceed to the critique. I quite enjoyed the book. It is very interesting. It is also easy to understand, nice to read, enjoyable to read. There is a lot of humor, so I really enjoyed the book. Only thing I found a bit difficult is the choice of thematic focus. Now, the book clearly focuses on using nudges on a high organizational level, such as a government level, and there isn't a lot of information why and how specific nudges work. Now, I have to admit, if they would have done that, it would probably have turned into just another book about biases and fallacies, so alright for that. Another thing that is barely mentioned is advertising and marketing. And this I would have found interesting because that is probably where we encounter most nudges in our day-to-day lives and where nudges are used in a manipulative way. And it would have been helpful, for example, to discuss how we can defend ourselves against that, how we can avoid being influenced in marketing and so on. And since the government level is so important here, maybe it could have been discussed what could be done on the government level to prevent the abuse of nudges in marketing and advertising. One thing I like a lot is that since I read the book, I now am more aware of nudges I encounter in my daily life. Now, I frequently notice nudges I didn't notice before. Recently, for example, I picked up a flyer from our internet provider about some other plan they offer, or maybe mobile phone plan, I don't recall. And always they clearly advertise some entry price that is rather low, but that you will only get for the first year, and after that it gets way more expensive, and that is obviously a nudge. Or one thing I found quite interesting, in Germany, if you visit a shopping center and you go to the customer's toilet, there's always a small plate where you can leave a tip for the people who clean and maintain the toilets. And I think this is clearly a good thing. I always leave a tip because I appreciate their work. But what I found interesting is that the amount of coins on that plate always seems carefully calculated, because the plate never is entirely empty. There are always a few coins on it, so you always think, oh look, the other customers left a tip, so I probably should do so as well. But on the other hand, the plate is never too full, there's never too much coins on it, so you don't think, oh well, they have enough already, I don't need to give them any more. And there are plenty more examples where I notice nudges in day-to-day life that I wasn't really aware of before. So bottom line is, I do recommend the book. It is about quite an interesting topic. It is very enjoyable to read, and I think it is a nice addition to our topic of biases and fallacies, where we get some nice ideas about how to deal with them and actually use them in a positive way. If you watched a few of my videos, you will have noticed that at the end I always ask people to like the video and to subscribe to the channel. And yes, that is a nudge as well. We will see each other again next week. For today, I'll take my leave. Have a nice day. See you next time.